Some games are so widely adored and imitated that to call them the greatest of all time has become a cliché. This is especially true in the realm of the PC, where even the most obscure works will develop their own scarily obsessive fans. In the entirety of the medium's history, few games have been crafted with such clear love, ambition, and stubborn determination as the Cyberpunk conspiracy simulator that Ironstorm bestowed upon the world and christened Deus Ex. The year is 2052 and the world is a shambles, with huge corporations, Orwellian governments, and an apocalyptic plague cheerfully dubbed the Grey Death. JC Denton, an agent for the United Nations Anti-Terrorist Coalition, fresh out of the academy and brimming over with cutting-edge nano-augmentations, is tasked with recovering a shipment of stolen vaccine from a secessionist group. Of course, this initial goal is soon overshadowed as hints of far grander schemes creep into view.
They'd have replaced his whole body if it would have improved performance. If that's how you judge a man, by performance, then eventually it's not about people, but upgrades, versions, functionality.
When I first donned a JC's trenchcoat and inexplicable sunglasses, I was grooving with the premise and enjoyed the interactions, but didn't really understand what all the fuss was about. It was only once events started to pick up pace that I developed a proper appreciation for the craftsmanship that weaves Deus Ex together. Any story is only as good as the devices used to tell it. While there are almost no wholly non-interactive cutscenes, there's an abundance of dialogue, lore-filled reading material, overheard conversations, and more besides. The beauty of Deus Ex's plot, however, is that if you rush through or don't pay much attention, you're liable to miss a bunch of it. Conversations that seem entirely meaningless the first time take on a whole new meaning during a second or 10th playthrough, alluding to goings-on behind the scenes, foreshadowing upcoming twists, and skillfully developing characters. The often spoofed voice work shouldn't be allowed to distract from what is truly a masterful implication of narrative in a medium whose storytelling potential remains largely untapped to this day.
Mr. J.C. Denton, in the flesh. As dark and serious as his brother.
So while the acting is hardly a rival to Legacy of Kain's thespian entourage, I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that Deus Ex's vision of the future remains one of the most complete and believable virtual worlds I've ever lost myself in. More so in light of real-world developments following the game's release. Perhaps even more famous than the story itself is the unique and occasionally jaw-dropping extent to which certain plot elements can be directly affected by your actions throughout the game. Some of the more impressive examples would require spoiler tags, but a recurring theme early on involves your approach to tackling enemy troops. I admit to suspecting the game was reading my mind when somebody first complained about my use of excessive force, and even the submissions you find on certain levels can conclude a number of ways depending on your methods and how the characters involved end up. More than once I've killed someone under the assumption the game would end, only to find the developers prepared for that eventuality. While the 3 possible and all remarkably awesome endings are largely unaffected by any of this, the freakish way characters will reference a specific choice you made hours earlier adds a uniquely personal aspect of the role-playing experience I've never seen anywhere else.
By the way, Denton, stay out of the ladies' restroom. That kind of activity embarrasses the agency more than it does you.
Adding hugely to the atmosphere is the soundtrack, which first makes its presence known in obscenely glorious fashion on the main menu and never lets up. Practically every level has its own selection of tunes, including separate ambient combat talking and even game over tracks, requiring a veritable army of artists and encompassing such diverse genres as techno, jazz and classical. Most manage to remain pleasant even after looping for hours, but a handful soar above that. Not only are tracks like UNATCO, Hong Kong and VersaLife beautiful in isolation, they manage to perfectly capture the mood of their respective levels and fit the tone established by recent plot developments. Deus Ex is one of those cherished games whose soundtracks are inextricably bound to emotional memories in my head. So we've established that Deus Ex is a titan of interactive storytelling, but what about the actual sodding game, you may be wondering? Well, if you forced me to cram Deus Ex into a genre, I'd have to call it a first-person shooter. After all, you run around in a first-person perspective and use a variety of weapons to turn enemies into globs of gore. To think of Deus Ex as merely an FPS, however, would be doing it a severe disservice. Not only, for instance, is there a vastly greater emphasis on plot and exploration than in most shooters, There are also multiple varied and entirely valid playstyles, building on a set of skills which can be upgraded as you earn points by accomplishing goals. The true genius of all of this is that whereas full-on RPGs like Oblivion are so open-ended and impossible to balance that there will always be some character builds which are just undeniably more practical than others, Deus Ex's levels, while big, almost always provide a route for just about any preferred means of play. If you want to blast through the front door with a rocket launcher and set everything inside on fire, you can. Equally though, it's possible for a sneaky agent to pile up some boxes, clamber through an air vent and bypass much of the immediate danger, or maybe hack some turrets so they can turn on their masters. It gets positively eerie sometimes just how well the missions can cater to one's tastes. Furthermore, since there's a finite quantity of items in the game and it's impossible to have all the augmentations at once, no single character can ever find absolutely everything, taking the replay value into absurd territory. Really though, I think Deus Ex lends itself to a stealth-based style. It seems more in keeping with the futuristic super agent vibe to pick locks, rig up traps and stab people in the back of the head. For the ultimate experience, play on the realistic setting, which leaves you susceptible to near instant death, but makes enemies similarly fragile to balance it out. Grunts only appear able to see 50 degrees in front of them, but cameras can spot you at a glance and robotic adversaries will goopify targets in an instant. In many ways, the non-linear levels remind me of Thief and Hitman, and while the stealth mechanics feel more primitive than Thief 2, less polished than Splinter Cell Chaos Theory, and require less patient planning than Snake Eater, the fact that I feel the need to make such comparisons should tell you how much I enjoy Deus Ex's sneakery. What Deus Ex offers over any of those purely stealth-focused titles, however, is the potential for endless hilarious experimentation. As I'm sure has been made clear, Deus Ex is more than capable of telling a mature story with complex themes and allusions to classical literature and mythology. Yet that's not what most of the footage you'll find on YouTube focuses on. From distracting a guard long enough to unleash a caged beast on him, right up to breaking a man's skull by throwing health kits, there are antics you can get up to in Deus Ex that simply cannot be replicated anywhere else. Personally, I enjoy maxing out the speed augmentation, allowing me to pogo across rooftops and attack my foes from all angles, most often using the ever-entertaining TNT boxes. There's a delicious dark comedy to be found in such exploits, and the joy of weighing up a situation and devising a ridiculous scheme with which to resolve it is an almost spiritual experience. Alas, with all this chaos comes a price. It's never a good sign when you can literally exploit a bug before the game has even really started, but it's pitifully easy to figure out a way of getting extra XP at the character creation screen. And for all my praise of the incredible balance between the playstyles, it has to be said that the swimming and environmental skills are laughable wastes of your precious points. The developers were given a remarkable amount of freedom and exploited the opportunity as best they could, resulting in a game overflowing with ideas, not all of which were baked to the same golden crisp texture. Other examples of this phenomenon include Black and White and Minecraft. Almost all the glitches I've witnessed have done little more than make me laugh, so judging from my experience, Deus Ex is still less likely to catch fire than such modern wonders as Skyrim. And that's an appropriate comparison, since Morrowind is another revolutionary title from around the same time. The difference is that while Morrowind, for all its charms, has only become increasingly clunky and cantankerous as time has gone on, Deus Ex's soul is so enrapturing and its ambition so unparalleled that its more dated elements are more than bearable. Honestly, the game's graphical shortcomings don't bother me that much, since every detail bleeds more character than almost any big budget title of recent years. If nothing else, Deus Ex is a monument to what a dedicated developer can manage, even with obvious hardware limitations, proving to the world that design should take precedent over fidelity. I can't even imagine what might be accomplished if a publisher today gave a studio even half the freedom Ironstorm had. Fortunately, there's an advantage to discovering Deus Ex late. As is so often the case with beloved games, a devoted modding community has produced all manner of tweaks, additions and fixes. Biomod, created by Clorf as an expansion upon Yukichige's already popular Shifter mod, adds such features as a thief-style mantling ability and streamlines many of the augmentations. I really think it adds to the game without disrupting the core balance. Just as with Oscuro's Oblivion overhaul, I can't imagine going back to vanilla Deus Ex after having enjoyed Biomod. Just another reason to avoid the PS2 version like the Grey Death. I've hyped Deus Ex up to the extreme in this review. Honestly, I wish I didn't have to, but I can't stay silent in the face of such majesty. Some find the freedom too overwhelming, while others can't look past the cracks in the canvas. There are folk for whom it just won't gel, no matter how much they try and let it. Like I said, it took me a few hours before the magnitude of the greatness before me began to sink in. Really, I can't see how any serious gamer can't at least be curious enough to give one of the so-called best games ever a fair go before passing judgment. Similarly to something like Dark Souls, it's definitely an experience that demands you invest before it's going to give something back. Deus Ex sat on my get-to-it-eventually pile so long that I now consider it my vocation to lead other wayward souls towards the light. Oh yes, it's fugly, oh yes, it's broken, and oh god yes, the vending machines will be the death of us all. But the players who can look past all that, and get what the creators were trying to accomplish, are liable to discover that some legends live up to their legacies. They just don't make them like this anymore.
What a shame.
Now they're having a philosophical conversation, as you do, but what I could do is run out here, spray them with stuff, and then hit them until they fall down. But I think it would be more fun if I throw a grenade at them. And then smack them! And then die!